Reading with your kids.
Hola, niho, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni muli wanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so delighted and so very honored that you're joining us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to subscribe to the show in the iHeartRadio app, on Amazon Music, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, wherever you find your podcast. Our guest today is Katie Zhao. She's returning to the show to celebrate her wonderful new novel. It's called Winnie Zeng Unleashes a Legend. Before we invite Katie into the studio, we want to let you know that this episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast is brought to you by Vroom, Barry, Carey, and the Power Boost. Author and illustrator William G. Wilberforce III masterfully weaves a playful modern fable that is brimming with lessons of self-confidence, determination, and positivity. Wilberforce skillfully uses his background as a health coach and life trainer to share with young readers the importance of believing in oneself, focusing on what you can control in your life, and remaining positive and hopeful. Families and educators of young children will welcome the invitation for discussions that this joyful book brings. Be sure to check it out today. Vroom, Barry, Carey, and the Power Boost. This episode of the podcast is also brought to you by Bella Santini in the Troll War, Book 2 of the Bella Santini series by Angela Lee. Bella Santini, marked as a chosen one in ancient prophecy, must defeat the troll army to save the Fey Kingdom from her evil aunt. Kidnapped from school, Bella begins a quest to warn the Fey of the danger. A hidden secret threatens to upset Bella's emotional balance. Will Bella step into her true role? Magic, dragons, and trolls? Oh my! What if teaching your kids emotional intelligence was as easy and fun as reading them a bedtime story? And as a bonus, you can learn too. Check it out today. Bella Santini and the Troll War, Book 2 of Angela Lee's Bella Santini series. Join us right now from the Big Apple, New York City. Our guest is returning to the podcast to celebrate her brand new middle grade novel. It's called Winnie Zeng Unleashes a Legend. I have my copy right here. Welcome back to the show, Katie Zhao. Hey, Katie, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me back, Jed.
I'm excited to have you back. This seems like a really, really fun book. It was interesting the way it starts off talking about how horrible middle school can be.
Yeah. I'm really glad you found that to be a good start. I basically just wanted, so Winnie Zeng is a story of this girl who's just entering middle school, and she's just a very average girl. And so I kind of wanted to write that sort of experience, but with like a Chinese American lens. And, of course I had to incorporate some magic, because I think, especially at that age, like kids are always looking for the fantastical and the ordinary. At least that's how I was, at Winnie's age. So yeah, I just kind of wanted to write something that reflected like my not so great feelings toward middle school growing up, but that also like could kind of look at ordinary events through a magical lens, and give magic to a girl who looked like me.
You know, as somebody who's been performing educational magic shows in schools for 30 years, it absolutely, kids do love magic. And even I have a lot of people think, magic, middle school kids, they're over it. They don't want to see you and your magic tricks. But that's the audience I get the most fun response from, because it allows them to kind of be a kid again. They work.
Yeah.
So, and I think this is maybe one of the reasons that middle school is so scary. Kids seem to be working so hard to figure out who they're becoming, to figure out who they're supposed to become. And when I come in and I do my magic show, it gives them a chance to just go, oh, I can just be a kid again.
Yeah. Yeah. To be honest, I, at least for me, I feel like my middle school and high school years, like that awkward transition where you're not quite like a very young child anymore, but you're also not an adult. You're like in the in-between. Those were the hardest years for me. And, those were like the times where I was starting to realize, oh, I'm not so young that, I can just like let myself daydream all the time and just like do whatever I want all the time. Like now I have real homework and responsibilities and, like as you get older, right, your responsibilities pile up. I remember by like high school, there was like a test every other day, and outside of school there were like extracurriculars, and still like my mom wanted me to keep up with piano lessons and other stuff, even outside of that. I think a lot of like the wonder and mystery of life, you just don't have time to like think about it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I kind of wanted to bring some of that magic back to middle school.
Yeah. You were saying that Winnie looks like you, and
Yeah.
in some ways, she kind of reminds you of what you went through in middle school. One of the things I think is wonderful is that I think as you're talking about Winnie and about the book and kind of things that she experiences, is kids who sit down and read it are going to discover that Winnie might not look like me, but we share a lot of the same things. We're going through a lot of the same problems.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you brought that up, because that was something that I really wanted to capture with this novel and with all my middle grade or any of my novels. I'm writing from what I know, which is a Chinese American background. And so of course there are, some things kids can't relate to. If they aren't Chinese, they probably didn't go to Chinese school growing up. That's something that Winnie does in this book. She goes to Chinese school, which I think is kind of a unique experience that will speak to Chinese diaspora the most. But outside of that, she really is, just like, your average middle schooler, in America, just trying to get through homework. She like has, I would say, like pretty high ambitions for herself. She wants to get like good grades and stuff like that. But of course, she's a kid, and sometimes, she doesn't want to put in all that work either, and, kind of just wants to like relax and have fun.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think, with my past middle grade novels, I had written The Dragon Warrior duology, and Last Gamer Standing came out last year. I've actually had like an overwhelming response from kids who are like just from diverse backgrounds. Like when I put out these books, I didn't know what kind of response I would get. I thought, hopefully at least like it'll reach Chinese or Asian American kids who are, finally seeing books reflecting their experiences on shelves. But especially with Last Gamer Standing, I keep getting messages from teachers who are like, oh, my like boy gamers are really into this book. Like they love it so much. And I'm really glad about that too, because that book also features a girl character. And I wasn't sure if that would resonate with, boys who are reading the book. But it just goes to show that kids, like, if you can write a story that resonates just with like the experience of growing up, of dealing with challenges that, pretty much every kid faces, then no matter like their background, they're going to find things to resonate with, and, you're going to be able to reach them. And that's honestly like the greatest like reward I could have ever asked for, is just for these books to land with kids with different backgrounds and experiences, and for them to all say, I really connected with this part of the story, and, this book resonated with me in this or that way. I just like love knowing that, there's so much like it's just like these experiences are universal, and they kind of bring us together.
Yes, I love that. And I absolutely agree. If a story is well written and people can relate to the characters, it doesn't matter what the characters look like. We just relate to that humanity that we see, talked about on the pages or on the screen. And I would love to get to the point where and it's probably not going to be until my grandkids or great-grandkids are around that it's natural. It's like, it's not a big deal for me to pick a book with a character that's different than me. It's just, it's a book about somebody that's interesting.
Yeah. I honestly, like, I feel like I pay more attention to, like, when I read, like, the blurb on the back of a book or, you know, on the inside jacket, if, like, something about that summary just, like, really speaks to me, then, like, the cover, honestly, like, you know, it probably isn't, like, the first thing that'll grab me. It really is, like, oh, like, does this sound like an interesting story? Can I tell, like, this book is going to be funny or sad or whatever, like, whatever I'm in the mood for, I'll just pick that up. And I think we're getting close to that, where hopefully people aren't not reading books because of what they see on the cover. I think that's a really terrible decision, because you're going to be missing out on some really fantastic books. Don't judge books by their cover.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned going to Chinese school when you were young. Some listeners may have gone to Hebrew school when they were young. I know at our church there is, in our church elementary school, on Saturdays they hold Lithuanian schools. Can you talk a little bit about Chinese school and whether or not you hated going to it, whether or not it was important, whether or not your opinion of the experience has changed as you've gotten older?
You know, when I was going to Chinese school, I never could have imagined that one day I would be on podcasts talking about my Chinese school experience. Wow, what a throwback. So when I was going to school, I did not like it. I think that's true with any kind of experience that, like, your parents sort of, like, force you to do. But then as you get older, you sort of reflect on it and you're like, well, I'm actually really glad they pushed me to, like, learn something. So I started going to Chinese school when I was about, 5, 6 years old, about, the same time that, I was going to kindergarten. It just, like, is kind of like, how some people would go to church on Sundays. I would go to Chinese school on Sundays. That was, like, the norm. For me, there was one Chinese school, about 30 minutes away from where I grew up in Michigan. So, like, pretty much, the Chinese kids from, like, the area, there weren't too many, but all of us would, like, go to that Chinese school. It was, like, Sunday mornings. Some people did, like, afternoon classes. It would be about 2 hours of, like, learning in the grade level you're at. So, like, for example, if I was in 6th grade at my public school, then I would be in 6th grade at my Chinese school. And we would just, like, learn all sorts of things. We would learn how to read, how to write. We would learn a little bit of history. It was basically just like going to public school, but like a shorter time frame. So we squeezed a lot more information into that, like, very short time frame. And at my Chinese school, there was also, like, a choir. So my mom signed me up for that. There were, like, after school dance classes. It was just like, you kind of, like, build a community around all these people who'd go to Chinese school together. And I did that pretty much until I graduated and left for college. And I remember I resented having to do that, because it felt like, while my other friends who went to public school, like, they only had to go to school for 5 days a week, I had, like, a 6th day of the week, so I pretty much only had Saturdays free. But now that I'm older and I have a lot more perspective, I'm like, oh, I'm actually pretty glad that, I didn't, just, like, use that other day to, like, I don't know, just sit around the house and, like, do nothing. I'm glad I was able to connect with my culture and my roots, because I have a background in Chinese now. I know, like, a lot of, like, the stories and legends that actually shaped Winnie Zeng. And, I had the perspective to talk about Chinese school and write about it in these books. And it's, like, something, like, fresh and different that I haven't seen in books before. So I'm really grateful that I've had that experience, and that, I was able to remain connected to my culture through that way, because I grew up here and I've only visited China twice. So if I didn't go to Chinese school, I feel like I would really like feel disconnected from my background and just, I think I would feel like really sad about that loss of culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned that you learned some of the legends that we'll find that kind of shaped Winnie's adventure. Can you tell us one of those legends?
Yeah. So, I guess I would say like the main legend that sort of anchors this book is the story of Ho Yi, the legendary archer figure. And I think he's actually more famous in proximity to his wife, Chang'e, like the moon goddess. So that's the legend around like the Mid-Autumn Festival. So Chang'e and Ho Yi were in love. And then I think Chang'e had to fly to the moon. And Ho Yi couldn't go with her because, he wasn't immortal. And so like they were separated and it became like a very sad like love story. And I actually kind of like spun that tale because I've like learned about that tale for, a long time. But, I thought it would be like interesting to see like to write a story about like the aftermath of that because, it can't be easy to, know that your love is so far out of reach. Because, she's on the moon and Ho Yi's on Earth. So I just, no spoilers, but I kind of wanted to like turn the tale a little bit. So maybe, the hero figures aren't necessarily always the hero figures. We'll just leave it at that because otherwise I'll just be like blurting out a giant spoiler.
All right. You caught my attention, that whole idea of falling in love with somebody who's immortal and you're mortal. That would be kind of challenging.
Yeah. I think there are a lot of stories like that, just in like all sorts of mythology, like Greek mythology, Chinese mythology, obviously. I think Japanese mythology too. Like every like, I feel like there are always like these like really grand, tragic love stories. Where people just can't be together because one of them is immortal, the other one is mortal, and obviously one of them is going to long outlive the other one. I've always been like fascinated by those kinds of stories.
Yeah. We love encouraging our families to read together, especially, when kids are younger, it's easy to get them all on a couch and cuddle up. It's a little bit more difficult reading aloud with your middle school kid because they're always busy and maybe they don't want to sit on the couch. And although it's great to read a story like Winnie aloud, but what kind of conversations if a family decides, well, we're going to co-read this together? And we're going to talk about it on the way to school or at the dinner table. What kind of conversations do you think those families can have about the book?
I think I was hoping, lots of different conversations surrounding the middle school experience. What it's like to just feel like you're so different. So that's something that Winnie like struggles with throughout the book. She feels like she's different because she doesn't look like most of her classmates. There's a scene in the story where she's sort of singled out for having food that looks very different from everyone else's. And that's an experience that I've spoken to a lot of people about, who come from a different cultural background, and they would say something like, yeah, I felt uncomfortable, bringing food like that to school because I knew like people would not treat me differently, but like they would look at the food like, mm-hmm. Oh, what is that? And some of them might not have positive reactions to it. So that was a conversation that I would hope would arise from Winnie, just like talking about how being in middle school, it just like kind of breeds an environment where, people just feel like their differences make them stand out. Mm-hmm. Because I don't think it's just like, a matter of looking different either. Like if you don't wear like the newest clothes, if you don't have like the hottest video game, if you aren't into like the sports that your classmates are into, like maybe you just really like, I don't know, board games or mm-hmm. video games. People have like treated people differently. I remember when I was growing up, I was really into like manga and anime, mm-hmm. but I could never tell anybody because back then people thought people who were like into that were like weird. It was almost like a very like secret like underground sort of hobby that like I knew I could just go to a few friends with. But yeah, now of course manga and anime is very popular. I see like I go on TikTok sometimes and I see people like very like actively talking about like different shows or mangas they're reading and watching. So yeah, I kind of just wanted to like capture that experience of like just being like different in middle school and how awkward and lonely it can make you feel.
Yeah, yeah. Isn't it's weird when you say that. It's middle school can be a really lonely time, but every day you're surrounded by 60, 70, 90, 100 kids, peers, and I think that's even lonelier when you do feel alone, but you're in that crowd. It's much easier being alone when you're out in the woods somewhere.
I think you just captured the New York experience perfectly. Actually, yeah. New York and middle school have a lot in common. Yeah. Like it's like New York is like, I think the biggest city in the U.S. Or one of the biggest for sure. But people like often don't really talk to each other, so it can be very lonely if you like don't know anyone here, don't know how to make connections. And that is, I think, very familiar to anybody who's gone to middle school, which is like pretty much everybody, where you are surrounded by so many peers. But especially if you already know like you're different because you have different interests, or like say like maybe you don't know English very well because you just moved here, it can be so hard to find your people and to find people who accept you. Because I think like at that age, like at any age, like humans sort of just want to like fit in and they find different ways to fit in. But when you know you don't fit in, it can just be like, it can feel very strange to be in your skin. And I think even, with the kids who do like look popular and have lots of friends, I'm sure they still have interests that, they don't like necessarily, just like display to their friends because maybe they're scared that, those friends would, make fun of them. I actually saw a tweet the other day from a librarian mutual, who said something about, one of her like, boy students really loves to read the book Twilight. But he's like a sportsy kind of person. And so like he would like secretly read it because he wouldn't want other kids to know. And I just think that like really captures the middle school experience perfectly. It's like you don't want people to know about your like quirks or what you think makes you stand out, because what if you like get targeted or bullied for it? I think bullying is like a big problem at that age. So you basically just try to do whatever you can to avoid that.
Yeah. When you're talking about bringing in different foods or reading different kind of magazines, I think one of the things we can help our kids know is if you're sitting at a table next to somebody and somebody pulls out dumplings instead of the regular school food, or peanut butter and jelly sandwich, well, I guess they're banned in a lot of schools. But and if they're eating something different, if your kid turns and goes, "What is that?" as opposed to, "Oh, that looks different. What is it?" Just our tone and the way we react to something that's different can make so much difference, and kind of bring people together as opposed to immediately making them defensive and like, "Oh, you're making fun of me. I don't want to be here."
Yeah, and I think part of that comes down to just, trying to not necessarily normalize like different foods, because I think, all foods of all cultures are special. So we want to preserve what makes it special. But yeah, I think if you have like positive depictions of like, for example, Chinese food, which I try to do for Winnie, then I think, a kid from a different background who picks up this book will, suddenly like maybe they didn't know about mooncakes, but now they're learning about mooncakes. And maybe their Chinese classmate brings in mooncakes one day, then they won't be like, "Oh, what is that?" They'll be like, "Oh, what is that?" I think I read about or like saw that somewhere. And then that like promotes like a really positive like sharing of culture, which I think is like well, that's the goal, right? The ultimate goal.
Absolutely. Katie, I'll share this with you real quick. I don't know if I mentioned to you before, we've hosted international kids in our home, and at least 4 or 5 from China. And one of our Chinese daughters we took to P.F. Chang's early on in her time with us, and her first reaction was, "This isn't Chinese food."
Yeah.
And I go, "I know, which..." Well, we like it. Oh, wow. I just love this idea that helping kids appreciate differences and really just kind of encouraging kids to find there's this beautiful world out there. Again, that daughter who told me very clearly that P.F. Chang wasn't Chinese food. We spent a day making dumplings together, and she taught me how, from scratch, from the dough and rolling out the wrapper and the fillings and everything. And I always put too much in, and she would fix it for me. There's so many beautiful things in cultures that if we help our kids open their minds to them and open their minds to discovering differences, and it just makes the world richer.
Yeah, I agree. I really think it is all about like portrayal. I think every kid, has an open mind, because why would they like feel like something is strange? They probably, feel like that's the reaction they should have, because maybe this certain culture or like food hasn't been portrayed positively to them before. But I think like, if you just like try to show them more positive depictions of food, or, any aspect of cultures, then like they would embrace that, because why wouldn't they, right?
Right. Yeah. It's cool.
Yeah.
Katie, where can people go to find out more about you and find out more about Winnie?
I have my website, www.kdzhao.com. You can also find me on Instagram, where I'm most active, at KT Zhao author. And then I have the same handle on TikTok and Twitter, but I'm not quite as active on those 2 platforms. But you can just, if you Google my name, you'll find me.
We've had a great time speaking to the author of the brand new middle grade novel. It's called Winnie Zeng and Unleashes a Legend. Our guest has been Katie Zhao. Hey, Katie, thanks for being back with us.
Thanks so much.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Very, very special episode. We'll be speaking with 12-year-old Cassidy Stalker. She's an amazing young woman who faced a momentous challenge in her life, and the way she defeated it was through love for others. You don't want to miss it. That's the next episode of the podcast. Want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, I want to start by thanking our guest, Katie Zhao. Please be sure to check out Winnie Zeng Unleashes a Legend. Also want to thank our sponsors. Please be sure to check out Bella Santini and the Troll War by Angela Lee. And also, we want to celebrate Vroom, Barry Carey and the Power Boost. Great book by William Wilberforce III. My team, I want to thank my team, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Nicole Belcastro, Ashley Contouris. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.